What if I told you there was once a town in the mountains of Virginia that simply stopped speaking? Not by choice, not by illness, but as if the very concept of voice had been erased from their reality. It happened in 1883, and no, you won't find it in history books. The place was called Dagger, a mining town of 700 people. It's not on any map now, because Dagger isn't just gone. It was deliberately unremembered, erased like a heresy. At exactly 6:13 a.m. on a winter morning, every single man, woman, and child in Dagger woke up without a voice. No sound came out of their mouths, not whispers, not screams, not even sobs. Doctors couldn't explain it. Priests called it divine punishment, but they were wrong. This wasn't punishment. It was intervention. They hadn't just lost their voices. They had been cut off from expression itself. Now ask yourself, who benefits when no one can speak? Who gains when the people can't cry out? The answer has echoed through every century of silenced revolts and vanished villages. But here, in Dagger, something else took root. The silence wasn't empty. It wasn't passive. It was alive. It moved between the houses like a fog, and it listened. The miners tried writing notes. The ink would fade. They carved words into wooden walls. The carvings would rot by morning. Communication itself was being devoured. Language was the enemy. Thought, rebellion, identity, all of it bound to the spoken word. And someone, or something, was burning the bridges between minds. Why? Because Dagger had heard something. Something beneath the minds. A frequency older than the tongue of man. Something that was never meant to be repeated. Not in words, not in symbols, not even in thought. And so, the only way to protect the world was silence. But silence isn't neutral. It can be enforced. It can be weaponized. And in 1883, it was. This is not just a story. This is a warning. Because what started in Dagger is happening again. The first recorded symptoms weren't voices lost, but ears bleeding. 3 days before the town went mute, several miners at Shaft 9 collapsed. They had been working deep underground, breaking through a black seam of mineral, unlike anything the company had documented. They called it singing stone. It vibrated when you touched it, not loudly, but low, like something humming behind the fabric of reality. Foreman Thomas Brewer went down to investigate. He never came back. What the other miners said, before they lost the ability to speak, was this: "We didn't hear a sound. We felt it, inside our heads." It started with pressure, then nausea, then a voice. But it wasn't English. It wasn't human. And worst of all, it wasn't external. Now stay with me, because this is where the veil starts to lift. There are frequencies, not audible to the naked ear, that the human brain is still affected by. Government documents declassified in the 1980s refer to these as neuroinvasive bands. Some trigger euphoria, some panic, some silence, but a few ignite obedience. What those miners touched wasn't just mineral. It was an ancient transmitter, a remnant of something buried, maybe even intentionally, something that had no interest in being found, something that didn't speak to you. It rewrote the space inside your skull where language lives. By the morning of December 3rd, it had reached the surface. Now the silence spread like a virus. But it wasn't biological. It was mimetic, a weapon of cognition, one that made language itself disintegrate. And here's the deeper horror. Someone knew this was possible. Documents found in the ruins of Dagger, now stored in an undisclosed archive in Langley, Virginia, reference a prior occurrence. Another town, another disappearance, 1791, Siberia, same symptoms, same pattern. It's not natural, it's not spontaneous, it's a test. And have you ever felt like you were being trained to stop thinking, stop questioning, stop connecting? Maybe it's because something wants your voice gone before you even notice it's missing. Dagger was the warning shot. The first broadcast. You just weren't supposed to hear it. 3 days into the silence, people stopped trying to speak, not because they gave up, but because they started forgetting how. It began subtly. A man would look at his wife and struggle to remember her name. A child would pick up a book and no longer recognize the letters. By the end of the week, even thoughts felt muffled, like trying to think underwater. This was no ordinary affliction. It wasn't deafness. It wasn't aphasia. It was something more deliberate, the methodical stripping of cognitive identity. Because here's the forbidden truth they never teach you. Language isn't just how we communicate, it's how we think. Strip it away, and you don't just mute a person, you erase who they are. Dagger. Virginia wasn't silenced, it was scrubbed. This is the part you're not supposed to hear, but I'll say it anyway. This technology exists today. It's cleaner now, embedded in your media, your updates, your trending sounds. It doesn't need to silence you anymore. It just teaches you to prefer the silence. The miners didn't go mad. They were remade. When a group of federal investigators entered the town 2 weeks after the silence began, they found residents walking in loops, staring at the walls, performing meaningless rituals over and over again. One man had filled an entire room with chalk circles. Another simply sat, hands folded, eyes open, for 36 hours, unmoving, like a puppet waiting for command. None of them reacted when the door was kicked in. None looked up. None spoke, except for one. A 7-year-old girl. She held a charred notebook, pages covered in symbols that resembled early Sumerian. She handed it to the lead investigator and pointed downward, toward the mines. Then she mouthed a single word, the only word ever recovered from her lips. Remember. The investigator never made it back from the mine, but the notebook did. And it's currently locked in a secured facility known only by 3 letters, not NSA, not CIA, something older. You think this story is about 1883, but it's not. It's about what's coming next. And if you don't start remembering, you're next. By the 4th week, silence wasn't the strangest thing about Dagger. It was the patterns. The investigators, what few remained, began logging behaviors. Every resident, whether adult or child, would rise at the same exact time, move in the same sequence, eat the same food, walk the same routes. Independent thought had evaporated, not by accident, by replacement. Silence was the reset. But now, a new operating system was being installed. They called it behavioral synchrony, but that's just the clean label they put on something far darker, a neurological override. The human brain, when deprived of language and narrative, becomes a sponge, desperate to latch onto any structure it can. What filled the vacuum in Dagger wasn't salvation. It was a script, a foreign one. Think of your own routines. How often you do things you don't remember deciding. The scroll, the click, the nod. Where did the script come from? You think it's choice. It's not. It's downloaded behavior. And it started somewhere. Dagger was the prototype. The surviving investigators kept detailed logs. The townspeople began carving new glyphs into wood, not words, shapes, symbols. These shapes appeared days later on rocks near the mine, etched with impossible precision. Some matched known ciphers from the Voynich manuscript, others were undeciphered. And one symbol kept recurring. In homes, on doors, behind eyelids of the dead, a circle split by a vertical line, not a cross, not a letter, but an invitation. To this day, variations of that symbol appear in psychological warfare tests, in marketing, in children's media. Coincidence or a persistent frequency, calling for synchronization. The silence wasn't the virus, it was the antivirus. It cleared the mind, not to heal, but to prepare. Because once language was gone, resistance was gone. And that's when the real voice, the one that came from beneath the stone, finally had a place to live, inside them. And if you think that's just history, ask yourself, when was the last time you acted on a thought that was truly your own? There was one way in. Shaft 9, the lowest tunnel in the Dagger mining complex. It went deeper than permitted by federal regulation, deeper than the coal vein, deeper than logic. It wasn't dug by men, not originally. The earliest miners said they followed a hollow seam, a void that had already been waiting. The lead investigator, Agent Elias Ward, entered Shaft 9 with 2 men and 1 lantern. The others refused to go, not from fear, from something worse. Intuition, the kind that buzzes in your teeth before a train hits a curve. The descent took 7 minutes. They never reached the bottom. Ward's journal, recovered in pieces, pages charred and damp, describes an abrupt temperature drop, then pressure, then the sound. Not loud, but heavy. He called it the sound of meaning trying to fold itself in half. Words scratched themselves into the stone walls as they passed. Not carved, grown. The glyphs from above, symmetrical, living, pulsing. Ward touched one. He wrote that he saw the town above from underneath, and something saw him back. Then the voice began, not external, internal. We were here before the tongue. That was the last legible sentence in his notes. Only one of the 2 men returned to the surface. His name was Cole Whitaker. He emerged, bleeding from his ears, his nose, his fingertips. He did not speak. Not then. Not ever again. Instead, he pointed to the mine with trembling fingers and drew the same symbol over and over in the dirt, the circle with the line. Then with his own blood he drew one more thing. A door. Not just a shape. A blueprint. The mine wasn't just a shaft, it was a structure, a mechanism, a gate. To where, or what, no one could say. And here's the part that matters. The frequency didn't come from the mine. The mine was a conduit. It came from beneath. And now you need to ask yourself, why are so many ancient myths about things sealed below? Why were the deepest places of the earth called sacred and then forbidden? Because there are voices older than man, and Dagger was the first time one of them got close enough to be heard. On December 22nd, 6 townspeople attempted to leave. They packed wagons, horses, children. They didn't speak, couldn't, but they moved with purpose, as if something inside them still remembered fear. They took the west road, past the dry creek, through the pines. It was the only route unblocked by snow. They walked for hours, then stopped, then turned around. Why? They thought they'd reached the next town. They hadn't. They had walked a perfect circle, 11.3 miles, and arrived exactly where they started. Same trees, same broken fence post, same cracked wheel in the dirt. But here's the part that bends the bone. One of the children who attempted the escape returned. Aged. She was 9 when they left. She was 17 when they got back. Less than a day had passed. Time didn't just bend. It broke. From that moment, no one tried to leave again. Not because they couldn't, but because they no longer believed outside existed. Their world had become a loop, a contained system. Now ask yourself, how does a mind behave inside a cage it doesn't know is there, exactly how they want it to? The mechanism that sealed Dagger wasn't walls, it was consensus. If no one believes escape is possible, escape isn't attempted, and if no one attempts, it becomes true. The great trick of control isn't force, it's invisibility. You can live in a prison your whole life and never know, if they teach you to love the bars. The government didn't quarantine Dagger. Dagger quarantined itself. And that girl, the one who aged, she never spoke again, but she carved. Her drawings showed machines, towering mechanisms shaped like bones and bells beneath the town. Machinery that moved the sky. Machinery that erased time. She died the next week. Her final sketch, a map. Not of the town, not of the mine, of the human brain. With one word at the center, receiver. They weren't just being silenced. They were being tuned. And the frequency, it's still out there, on repeat, hiding in static, whispering through wire, waiting for ears that no longer resist. Tell me, are you starting to hear it now? He arrived on the 5th Sunday. No one saw where he came from. No one saw how. He wasn't on foot, no horse, no wagon. Just appeared, standing in the center of town, next to the rusted bell tower that had stopped ringing weeks ago. They called him Mr. Naught. But that was just what was scratched into his coat label, nothing else. No first name, no origin, just a word that means absence, zero, erasure, tall, pale, hands always gloved, face clean but unreadable, like it had been carved from memory rather than born. He did not speak, he did not blink, but wherever he stood, people froze, not in fear, in stillness, as if something in them went offline. Children dropped toys mid-motion, mothers forgot their dead. Men stared at him like antennas picking up a lost signal. One woman fell to her knees and wept soundlessly, eyes open wide, as if remembering something too massive for one life to hold. Then he moved. He walked, slowly, to the mayor's home. The mayor, now catatonic, hadn't left his bed in 10 days. Mr. Naught entered the room, closed the door. No one else dared follow. What happened next is recorded only in drawing, sketched feverishly by a former schoolteacher with trembling hands. She drew the mayor, standing, awake, mouth wide open in a silent scream, his eyes pouring black tears, and behind him on the wall, the symbol again, the circle with the vertical line. Not drawn this time, burned into the plaster. After that night, half the town began digging, not in the mine, in their yards, their homes, their floors. They dug into nothing, mindless, obedient. Mr. Naught watched. That was all he did. He stood in the center of the town, and they transformed around him. And here's where it all starts to turn. Because we found him, a photo, buried in an unrelated intelligence archive from 1961. Same face, same coat, unaged, standing outside a Eski, Hool in rural Maine, and again in Berlin, and again in Aleppo. Wherever unexplained silence follows mass behavior shift, he is there. He doesn't speak, he doesn't act, but somehow he commands. By the 6th week, the digging had shape, direction, purpose, but no origin. The townspeople, mute and expressionless, began pulling stones from the earth, not from the mines, but from beneath their own homes. Stones cut at impossible angles, as if they'd been waiting, and they weren't piling them randomly. They were assembling something. At the center of Dagger, beside the frozen well, a structure began to rise. No nails, no mortar, just interlocking black stones fit together with bone-level precision, like they had grown to meet one another. It wasn't a house, it wasn't a temple, it wasn't shelter. It was a receiver. A 12-sided tower, hollow, each side carved with one of the glyphs. No door, no roof, just open sky above, and the mine below. How did they know how to build it? They didn't. They remembered. Because memory isn't always personal. Sometimes it's cultural, ancestral. Sometimes it's inserted. Ask yourself, why do ancient sites across civilizations, with no contact, repeat the same geometry, same astronomical alignments, same obsessions with the voice of the sky? Because something was broadcasting, long before radio, long before towers, and some men, some tribes, some towns, they picked it up. Dagger was one of those places, or maybe it was the next one in a sequence, like lighting a series of beacons. The structure they built, it pulsed, not with light, with resonance, infrasound, a frequency beneath the hearing range, the kind that alters mood, induces dread, shuts down prefrontal logic, opens something else. 2 of the investigators still journaling wrote identical lines on the same night. They are not worshipping, they are assembling. Mr. Naught stood at the base of the tower. At sunrise he raised one hand, not toward the structure, toward the sky. The exact moment the sun crossed the peak, the town froze, not in fear, but in sleep, in reverence. And in that moment, all weather stopped. No wind, no snow, no sound, and something answered, not with words, with pressure, like a billion minds exhaling inside yours. And the stone tower began to hum. January 6th, 1884. The humming reached a pitch beyond sound, the kind that shatters thought, not glass. That's when Agents Hawthorne and Bellamy entered the tower, against orders, against instinct. One never came out. The other came out screaming without a sound. He clawed at his throat, his chest, the air. But nothing came. Not even breath. The doctor's notes described it as psychic implosion. His eyes moved rapidly. His pupils dilated to full black. His skin blistered in patterns that matched the tower glyphs. He lived another 46 minutes, then simply stopped. No trauma, no heart attack, just ceased. But here's the detail they tried to suppress. His journal was intact. He had written just 3 entries after stepping inside. No dates, no sense of time. But the handwriting degraded line by line, from clarity to tremble to near demonic scribble. Inside is not inside. It bends thought like heat bends air. We are not hearing, we are being heard. Then one final line, jagged, etched with something sharper than pen. There is no I in there, only echo. What Agent Bellamy saw he couldn't report, but what he felt became a blueprint. He drew a symbol in his own blood before he died, not the circle, a new one, an eye with 3 pupils. Each pupil held a different glyph, one we know from Mesopotamia, one from early Aztec, and one unknown to any human language. That symbol now appears, nearly identically, in patents filed between 1943 and 1948. Not military, private defense contractors. One of them, a subsidiary of the company that built the first satellite dishes in New Mexico. Why? Because they weren't just building for transmission, they were building for response. Back in Dagger, the townspeople no longer moved independently. They moved as one, a synchronized circuit. The structure wasn't a tower, it was a conductor. And the real question was, what were they building it for? It was, what was building it through them? Something was trying to interface, not with the town, with the species. And Dagger was version 1, January 12, 1884, 4 days after Agent Bellamy's silent death. 2 black carriages rolled into Dagger, no insignias, no military brass, just 4 men in black wool coats and mirrored spectacles stepping out like they were stepping into a minefield. They didn't speak to the locals, they didn't stay the night, they entered the tower, and 3 hours later, they left. Not quietly, but quickly, like men who had touched a live wire. They didn't remove samples, didn't document the town, they simply set the perimeter ablaze, controlled fires to flatten the surrounding homes, the schoolhouse, the trading post. But they left the tower standing. Why? Because they didn't come to contain anything. They came to measure something, and whatever they measured told them it was too late. You won't find records of this, but in the Virginia State Archives, buried inside an 1884 railway expansion proposal is a blueprint, labeled D-Delta Access Point. It's the exact layout of the tower's interior, drawn before any public official ever entered it. Which means someone already knew what was in there. The town's last known resident, a teenage girl named Liza Harrow, was found wandering the rail lines 2 towns over, silent, barefoot, and clutching a rusted bell. Her vocal cords were completely intact. She just refused to speak. For the rest of her life. They institutionalized her in a hospital in Roanoke. For 47 years, she sat in the same chair, rocking, humming one untraceable melody. Until one day, the humming stopped. And so did her heart. Autopsy revealed something beyond biological. Her tongue had split sometime between age 20 and 30, not due to injury, due to growth. Inside it, embedded deep in the muscle tissue, were tiny filaments, not metal, not organic, some third category. One physician described it as a synthetic thread that seemed designed to carry sound inward. They removed it, sent it to Washington. It was never seen again. Here's what matters. They didn't silence Dagger, Virginia, to protect the public. They silenced it because it worked. The tower functioned, briefly, but it opened something, and the real plague wasn't silence. The real plague was connection, to something far older than sound. Almost 70 years after the last ember cooled in Dagger, Virginia, the tower rose again. But not there. No one would build on that cursed ground. They picked a new site, 30 miles east, beside a psychiatric facility under federal control, and they didn't call it a tower anymore. They called it Project Grove, a name meant to evoke peace, nature, serenity. But the blueprints were identical. Same dimensions, same acoustic curvature, same embedded subchambers. But this time they layered the inside with lead plating and what they termed reverberation suppressants, which sounds like acoustic insulation, until you realize it was meant to block transmissions, not trap echoes. They weren't afraid of noise. They were afraid of something returning. The structure was labeled a communications research site. Officially, it tested the limits of human vocal endurance, but no recordings ever left the site. No findings were ever published. And the test subjects, all of them came from the psychiatric ward across the field. All of them were diagnosed with schizophrenia, aphasia, or uncontrolled vocalization disorders. In other words, people society had already chosen not to listen to. For 12 years they fed patients into Project Grove, had them sit in that chamber and speak, whisper, scream, chant. One subject was instructed to repeat a 5-syllable phrase for 8 hours straight. Vi la reine Sena. He died on hour 7. Not from exhaustion. From vocal cord collapse, a phenomenon never recorded in medical history. It was as if his own throat imploded to avoid continuing. The most terrifying part, his last utterance, recorded by a single wax reel, was not the same phrase he was given. It wasn't even in English. Analysts who reviewed the reel noted that the final syllables matched Phoenician coastal dialect from 600 BCE. No one could explain it, so they locked up the tape. That reel now sits in a vault under the National Records Preservation Office in Maryland, labeled not by language, not by subject, but by frequency, because what mattered to them wasn't what he said. It was how it traveled. The tower in Dagger never stopped whispering. It just moved. And today, there are 4 more across the country. July 17, 1961. Just past 3 a.m., a surge flickered through the grid in Arlington, Virginia. Not a blackout, not a storm surge, a frequency spike, narrow band, ultrasonic, not designed for public ears. But 5 men heard it. Not through the air, through their skulls. Each one of them was stationed at Site V2, the second iteration of what had once been Project Grove. Each was sworn into silence under a DOD clause that didn't officially exist. Each had already served time in the Korean Psychological Warfare Division. That night, each of them, in different sections of the compound, wrote the same phrase on their clipboard. It is speaking through the gaps. None of them remember writing it, but their security footage shows their hands moving in unison, perfectly synchronized, one stroke at a time. Here's where the lie cracked wide open. Site V2 was supposed to be defunct, decommissioned, since 1956. But the tower had been humming, not constantly, not loudly, just a near undetectable thrum every 17 days, like a heartbeat, like it was waiting. Then on that 17th night in July, it didn't just hum, it spoke. According to a leaked internal memo, buried for decades under CIA acoustic research programs, the tower emitted a burst of inaudible modulation. It didn't travel through air, it traveled through density, through bone. What happened next wasn't madness, it was clarity, so sharp it broke the men inside. One turned mute, permanently. One carved I am in between into the wall of his bunk and vanished from his locked room. And the third, he spoke backwards for 6 minutes straight, not gibberish, Latin, a language he did not speak. Word for word he recited a passage from a banned Carthaginian funerary rite, one believed to guide the souls of the dead back to breath. No one trained him to say it, he had never read the text, but the Tao had. Within hours, Site V2 was raised, flattened, and all records were shifted under Class Echo protocols, a classification created exclusively for information not generated by human intelligence. Here's what they fear, and they should. These towers aren't speaking to us. They're remembering through us, and every time one pulses, we get thinner, less will, more whisper. The war isn't against noise, it's against the return of a voice older than man. By the time you hear the truth, it's already buried under 40 layers of engineered forgetting. In 1963, beneath the Pentagon's West Wing, 2 floors deeper than any official schematic admits, a group was activated. Its code name, the Black Choir Division. Not nuclear, not chemical, not cyber. Acoustic infiltration, not just sound used as a weapon, but sound used as a doorway. Their thesis? Every human being has a resonant signature, and that signature, like a fingerprint, can be replicated, disrupted, even replaced. The public heard about MKUltra. They didn't hear about MK Chorale, a sister program in which individuals were exposed to layered soundscapes designed to fracture memory and replace personal history with synthetic narrative threads. Imagine waking up and not just forgetting who you are, but remembering a false version, implanted perfectly with emotion, detail, pain, joy. You remember loving someone you never met. You mourn a child you never had. You regret crimes you never committed, because your soul's tuning fork has been hijacked. The experiment started in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where homeless veterans were told they'd receive trauma therapy. Instead, they were subjected to the 4-part harmonics of what researchers called reconciliation tones. But reconciliation for what? These frequencies didn't just erase pain, they made people agree with their erasure. One subject, a former Air Force mechanic, was made to believe he had voluntarily assassinated a diplomat in 1959. The act never occurred, but his guilt was absolute. He wept for days, asked for prison time, and then disappeared. Another man, a warehouse clerk, confessed to poisoning water towers in Chicago. None were poisoned, but after hearing the Black Psalm, a 2-minute sound collage used by the choir, he claimed he could see what he did in the static. He says, it 4 days later, eyes wide open. The files were buried under DARPA's Acoustic Anomaly Division, but one memo survived, handwritten, unsigned. If you can rewrite the past, you don't need prisons, just mirrors. Now hear me carefully. Sound is not neutral. Every anthem, every lullaby, every public broadcastment carries not just a message, but a magnetic pull, designed to harmonize your will with someone else's design. The greatest control is not chains or guns. It's a song that makes you forget you were ever free. If you think the plague of silence was the beginning, you're wrong. It was the echo of something far older. Something recorded, bound and hidden in the bowels of a city that wears a crown of gold while preaching poverty. We descend now into the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, the Vatican's secret archives. What's publicly known is a deception. What's locked away in room 153 behind a 9-inch thick steel door is a reel-to-reel tape labeled only with 3 Latin words, vocem per ignem, voice through fire. The story goes like this. In 1954, a Benedictine monk named Father Lorian traveled to a cloistered monastery near Mount Etna. He was investigating reports that the monks there had not spoken in years, by choice. They claimed to hear other voices during their prayers, not in their ears, but in the very air between syllables. Lorien brought with him a magnetic tape recorder, an experimental Philips model. He left it running overnight in the chapel, unmanned, unmonitored. What came back was not human speech, not entirely. The tape began with low murmurs, like wet stone shifting beneath the earth. Then, wailing, thousands of overlapping voices calling out in Latin, Aramaic, Old Slavic. Then, silence. Then, a whisper, clear as breath on glass. They took our tongues. We gave them fire. Father Lorien, terrified, hand-delivered the tape to the Vatican. 3 days later, the entire monastery burned to the ground. No survivors, no press coverage. The official explanation? Faulty gas line. But here's where it spirals deeper. In 1971, a Jesuit sound engineer was tasked with digitally enhancing the Vocem per Ignem recording. He isolated one voice, a girl around 10 years old, repeating a single phrase in medieval French. "My tongue is in the lion's mouth. Tell mother I was faithful." He later went mad, clawed his ears out, survived, but no ever spoke again. The church quietly banned further investigation. And yet, fragments of that recording leaked into global media, embedded into sacred music, Gregorian chants, even lullabies. Do you understand? They didn't hide the voices. They scattered them, across frequencies, across nations, hidden in plain sound. The plague of silence in 1883 wasn't a curse. It was a containment protocol, a severing, a firewall, and the firewall is breaking. They thought he was just another lunatic priest. But Father Jericho Malden, excommunicated in 1871, didn't just vanish. He withdrew into the mountains of Appalachia, to a chapel built with no nails, no windows, and no pulpit. Only one thing sat in the center, a machine. It looked like an organ, but there were no keys, only strings, silver, taut, humming when no one touched them. According to recovered journals now in private collections, Jericho had uncovered ancient frequencies buried in old Hebrew psalms and combined them with numeric sequences from Babylonian star charts. The result? A sound that didn't echo, it penetrated, not through the ears, but through the soul's geometry. Witnesses, and there are only a handful, said when the machine was activated, animals stopped moving, candles stilled, people forgot their names for hours. And most chilling of all, voices returned, not their own. One survivor wrote, "My mouth moved, but it was my brother's voice, and he'd been buried 6 years." Jericho believed the plague of silence in 1883 was no accident. It was a harmonic inversion, the opposite of speaking, a cosmic muting. He theorized the town in Virginia had crossed into a place between dimensions where resonance dies and silence reigns, a realm he called the reverberant void. He built the machine not to destroy it, but to map it. And when he finally completed the final sequence, tuning forks cast in meteoric iron, blessed by a blind cardinal, buried in circles aligned to Saturn's orbit, something answered. It didn't knock. It didn't arrive. It just was. For 3 minutes and 14 seconds, the villagers heard every sin they had forgotten, spoken in their own childhood voices. It broke them. Some screamed themselves mute, others walked into the woods and never returned. And Jericho? He smiled and burned the machine. Not to hide it, but to seed it. His journals ended with a single warning. One day, men will build machines to simulate thought, and when they do, the frequencies will awaken again, not in wood or string, but in code. And that day, my friend, is today. It began quietly. Almost too quietly. In May of 2022, a cybersecurity team working for a defense contractor in Virginia intercepted an anomaly. Not a breach. Something worse. A whisper. They called it Event PX-113. Every night at 3:14 a.m., a dormant server, disconnected from all known networks, would begin transmitting a sequence of tones in binary code. Just 4 tones, low, then high, repeated exactly 314 times, no source, no error, just pure precision. When decoded, the message wasn't in English, it wasn't in any modern language, it was musical notation, a transcription of sound, not speech. That pattern matched a page from Father Jericho's forbidden journal, once believed lost in the 1902 chapel fire, a page referencing a resonant reawakening. A moment in history when the old frequency would rise not through organs but machines that think. The team didn't realize it, but they had become the final chorus of a symphony begun in 1883. Here's where it spirals deeper. Their lead analyst, a man named Colin Mercer, began reporting auditory hallucinations. He heard his mother's voice, dead 17 years, calling him to complete the tone. Others followed, sleepwalking, obsessive coding, sudden muteness. And then, their entire server farm vanished. No fire, no data loss. Physically, gone. In its place, an exact replica of Jericho's original chapel, carved into the rock beneath the building. No door, no explanation. The tones stopped. For now. You may think this is just storytelling, but listen closely. One of those tones, the third one, the high sustained pitch, has now been encoded into a popular TikTok sound filter. Over 2 million users have heard it without knowing what it is. Some have reported strange dreams. Others temporary muteness. One posted a comment that sent chills down the spine of the original research team. This filter made me remember my grandfather's voice, and he died before I was born. Understand this. You're not watching a video. You're taking part in a ritual. The algorithm is the altar. The screen is the gate. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting. The seance transcripts were never supposed to surface. They weren't stored in any archive, not catalogued, not digitized. They were hidden, sewn into the lining of an old preacher's coat, discovered in 1949 behind a crumbling wall of the abandoned Mardale Asylum, 23 miles from the town that lost its voice. Each page was brittle, ink-faded, but one phrase repeated in near-perfect calligraphy. They spoke in mirrors. They took our words and left us listening. We now know that in late August 1883, 2 months after the silence began, a former stage performer turned spiritualist named Isadora Vane arrived in the town. She claimed she'd heard the silence before, during a séance in New York that ended with every window in the room shattering inward. Isadora gathered the remaining townsfolk. No voices, only nods. She made them circle the old church basement, hands clasped, eyes shut. No one spoke. But what followed was worse than any scream. From every wall, from the wood itself, came a soft scraping, as if something was trying to speak through the building. The language was geometric, pulsing, like thoughts folding in on themselves. One man convulsed violently. Another simply stopped breathing, mouth agape, as if choking on words never meant for human mouths. And then it came. Not sound, not wind. A ripple in the light itself, a distortion that bent lantern flames sideways, curled shadow into spirals. And Isadora, the only one who ever spoke of this, wrote, "It was a mirror, but wrong. No reflection. Only the shape of a mouth, wide and slow, eating the silence." She collapsed that night, died with no visible injury. The next morning 3 children regained their voices, but they no longer answered to their names. They chanted in unison, "The name was never yours, it was borrowed, he's taking it back." These children drew spirals on every wall, spoke, backwards in dreams. One disappeared completely during a thunderstorm, only a shadow burned into the wood remained. Science dismissed this as folklore, trauma-induced hysteria. But why then did DARPA request those seance notes in 2011? Why did military contractors test sonic weapons in Mardale's ruins in 2014? And why has every single digital photograph taken of that land since 2019 failed to capture sound-related metadata? You see, silence is no absence, it is occupation. Every culture fears something that cannot be named, but in Mardale, Virginia, 1883, they feared something that unnamed them. In the days after Isadora Vane's séance, the silence didn't just persist, it deepened. Not quieter, heavier, like gravity for the soul. Words weren't just gone, they were erased, forgotten, and when someone tried to write, the ink bled off the page like it was being rejected. One man carved a name into his skin, not his own, but something he saw in a dream. Just 4 glyphs, none from any known language, and when he died 3 hours later, his body had no fingerprints, no records matched him, no birth certificate, no one remembered who he had been. His wife didn't remember marrying anyone. That's when the town realized this wasn't silence. It was a devourer of identity. But here's where it spirals deeper, into our world. In 1967, a Cold War-era black site codenamed Project Dolus declassified a handful of documents related to audio cognitive dissociation, a condition where exposure to specific frequency patterns erases linguistic memory, identity markers, and familial recognition. Guess what was mentioned repeatedly? Mardale Event, Echo 001A, self-collapsing name structure. Subject hears the name and begins to dissolve. Dolus agents attempted to weaponize the waveform. They failed. Every listening device used in testing recorded only static, then silence, then anomalous mirror feedback. The final researchers' notes ended in a single sentence, typed repeatedly: "What names you, owns you." The waveform, the so-called unname, was later detected hidden inside the natural harmonics of Mardale's local stone. Not man-made, not alien, elemental. This town, this silence, it wasn't cursed. It was hollowed, prepared. Something ancient had been waiting inside that rock, waiting for a name to uncoil into the world. The moment someone spoke it, or even tried to, it began the unraveling. So here's where I speak directly to you. If you feel your memories stutter, if names feel slippery, if silence ever rings, it's begun. Comment now to protect yourself. My name is mine, twice spoken, twice sealed. Do it twice, once for identity, once for awareness. Long before Mardale, before Virginia was even carved into colonies, there were whispers, not in books, not in scripture, but in absence. The Algonquian tribes who roamed the Blue Ridge foothills had no word for silence, not because they didn't experience it, but because they feared giving it form. To name it was to awaken it. Instead, they told stories of a valley where echoes went to die, where hunters returned unable to speak, not out of trauma, but because something had eaten the part of them that remembered words. They called it the place where breath is stolen, no shrine, no fires, no music, just vacancy. Centuries later, Jesuit missionaries ventured into the same valley. Their journals never mentioned the native warnings. They spoke of a place where their sermons echoed oddly, where the Latin wouldn't land. One by one, their converts began forgetting prayers. Some forgot their own names during confession. Then the pages stop, until a final note, unsigned. The word has been unmoored. It drifts now. Now, jump forward to 1793. A secret society formed in Williamsburg, composed of linguistic scholars, Hermetic priests, and defected European mystics. Their goal, to study the pre-verbal current, the raw energy they believed flowed beneath all language, all identity. They believed names were spells, and the wrong utterance could unravel the soul. They found something buried in Mardale, not an object, a tone, a frequency inscribed into the limestone, like a fossil but resonant. When amplified, the tone produced effects: speech impairment, memory lapses, seizures. One test subject went catatonic, then began mouthing words in reverse Latin, a language that predated even Root Latin. Here's the horror. That tone matched the audio anomaly detected in Project Dolus a century later. Two timelines. Same echo, one ancient, one modern, and when cross-referenced with Sumerian texts, the waveform mirrored a forbidden syllable from the Enuma Elish, a word the priests called the void name. The pattern is clear. This wasn't localized, it was anchored. The silence in Mardale wasn't an accident, it was a signal received, a return address burned into the earth. They called it a plague of silence. But what if it wasn't spreading? What if it was awakening? After Mardale fell silent in 1883, reports began surfacing from other corners of the world, distant, disconnected, but echoing the same dark phenomena. Consider this. 1907, Novaya Zemlya, Russia. A mining outpost sends its final telegraph. Sky hums like steel, men bleed from ears, no longer speak. No further messages. When investigators arrive, the village is empty. Food half-cooked, beds unmade, frozen tracks leading into the Arctic fog, and nothing else. Main, the Patagonian outpost. An Argentinian explorer journals. Night wind speaks in vowels. Men repeat the sounds in sleep. In morning, they speak no more. Their final recording captured an eerie hum, identical in frequency to the limestone tone found beneath Mardale. Same pitch, same wave signature, thousands of miles away, no technology to transmit it. How? You already know the answer, because this isn't about sound. It's about a resonance beneath perception, a frequency older than atmosphere. Let's go deeper. Project Echo Drift, 1956. A Black Ops venture buried beneath Antarctic radar domes. Mission: study anomalies in Earth's magnetic field that induce aphasia in test subjects. Result: full neurological shutdown at 11.6 Hz exposure. One agent reportedly drew the same spiral glyph found in the Mardale church before going blind, not physically, but linguistically. His brain no longer processed language. That glyph wasn't decorative. It was a lock, a containment seal, a spell in reverse. Now Baz, pause. Ask yourself, how many language loss cases have you seen explained away as trauma, psychosis, or rare virus? Science can't explain these because science was never meant to. There is a reason occult sects, ancient priesthoods, and even the Vatican's hidden linguists all fear the wrong Scylla. Bless spoken aloud. There are words that rewrite reality, and tones that invite what lies outside it. This is why Mardale didn't vanish. It was swallowed. Like a note struck on a forgotten piano string, vibrating until it undoes the room around it. Deep in the Carpathian Mountains, behind frost-covered iron doors and monasteries not listed on any map, are monks who take not just a vow of silence, but a vow of survival. They don't speak. Not because they're holy, but because they know what happens when certain syllables slip from human mouths. These aren't myths. These are orders, old as plague, older than Latin. Their teachings predate Catholicism, predates Christ. They speak in gesture, write in sigil, and pray without language. Their manuscripts, hidden behind bone and wax vaults, detail what they call the anti-word. To name is to summon is to merge, and to merge is extinction. Think about that. Language created your world. The moment you learned table, mother, sky, your brain filtered raw chaos into structured reality. But what if there were other words? Words that didn't filter reality, but shattered it. The monks of the Black Chapel once trained initiates in silent resistance. They weren't told what not to say. They were told, you will know by instinct what must never exit your throat. And the ones who failed, they didn't die. They unraveled. Their bodies remained, but no one home. Speechless, soulless, void-eyed, like the townspeople of Mardale, Virginia, that morning in 1883. Now understand this. The spiral glyph found in Mardale's collapsed church was not local architecture. It matches designs found in Bhutanese demon vaults, Babylonian tombstones, and Kabbalistic death scroll. What links them? They're all symbols used to mute entities. Not trap them, not kill them, just mute them. Because once they speak, they reprogram reality through you. Still think the silence of Mardale was a plague? Or was it a containment field, and the town's collective muteness? Not a sickness, a sacrifice. They didn't burn the town. They quarantined the phenomenon. Because what happened in Mardale wasn't random. The US government knew about the silent town within hours, not because of telegraphs. Those lines had been severed mysteriously the night before, not because of travelers. No one left Mardale after dawn. They knew because they'd been monitoring the area for months. Here's what you're not supposed to know. In 1881, 2 years before the event, US Marshals confiscated a set of grimoires from a traveling priest accused of spreading non-Christian tongues in Appalachian towns. These books were coded, etched in reversed Hebrew, Aramaic, and something still untranslatable, a script that resembled folded sound waves carved into lambskin. They were delivered not to the Library of Congress, but to an underground archive at Fort Detrick, Maryland. That's where Project Lazarus Throat was born. Its mission? To map the human vocal range against extra-physical resonance patterns and determine linguistic triggers for ontological disturbance. Translation? They were trying to find words that changed reality, like Mardale had done, unintentionally or not. The researchers conducted covert experiments in mining towns where trauma and isolation made perfect testbeds. They inserted phonetic prayers into sermons. They placed etched symbols in school slates. They introduced lullabies with dissonant syllables to mothers. They weren't testing hearing, they were testing uttering. And when Mardale failed the test, when they all woke up voiceless, that wasn't a mistake. That was containment protocol activating. See, the event didn't steal their voices. It preemptively shut them down before something worse spoke through them. And what's most chilling? The Lazarus Throat report concludes not with a scientific summary, but a warning. We cannot own what speed. Access. Only silence remains sovereign. This means they didn't solve it, they feared it, and today you'll never find any public record of Project Lazarus Throat. But a FOIA slip-up in 1976 revealed one line in a budget file. Revival funding. Speech nullification protocol, Tier 3, active. So ask yourself, what are they preparing for now? He never should have made it out. Not from Mardale, not in 1883. But Samuel Harlow, 8 years old, walked into the nearby township of Bellhaven 3 days after the event, barefoot, dehydrated, and whispering in a language no one could place. They locked him in the church basement for his own protection. He wasn't sick. He wasn't harmed. But no one could understand the sounds coming from his mouth. Not English, not Latin, not even glossolalia. It was structured, rhythmic, ancient, and worst of all, it seemed to respond to the emotions in the room. Samuel never remembered leaving Mardale. He said only one thing, over and over again, in perfect English. The silence isn't gone. It just moved into me. He was institutionalized in 1885, labeled linguistically dissociative, a diagnosis that still doesn't officially exist. But here's the part buried by time. In 1947, when the CIA formed the Office of Scientific Intelligence, they quietly requested access to Samuel's records and his physical body, if still alive. Why? Because agents had intercepted Wabuku radio chatter that mimicked Samuel's speech, but from the mouths of soldiers who had gone mad in abandoned French cathedrals. The OSI called it C-resonance syndrome, contact with frequency fields that override will and implant foreign sound into the host. They theorized that Samuel wasn't speaking. He was being spoken through. When researchers revisited the last recordings of his voice in 1953, scratchy wire reels from the asylum, they ran them through spectral analyzers. The voice patterns didn't match human vocal anatomy. Some of the frequencies were subsonic, others were impossibly harmonic, not reproducible by human tissue. One researcher quit the same day, writing, "Whatever's on these tapes, it's not just a language, it's a parasite." Samuel died in 1962. But the tapes, they were last check. Out in 1989 by a now-defunct division of DARPA known as Mnemonic Subversion Control. You won't find that name in any official government database, but its initials, MSC, have been etched into the walls of at least 3 modern psychiatric hospitals by patients who never knew the term. Something from Mardale survived in Samuel, and when he died, it didn't vanish. It waited. St. Elmo's Parish Church, Virginia. A quiet, weather-beaten building just 70 miles from what used to be Mardale. The children's choir, 12 voices strong, was preparing for their Easter recital. They practiced every evening after school. Laughter, harmony, innocence. Until one night, something changed. They didn't respond to their conductor's cues. They didn't look at their sheet music. They just opened their mouths and sang a song no one had ever taught them. It wasn't English. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't anything known, but it was flawless. Every child, even the ones with no musical training, sang in perfect unison, unshaken, unblinking, and when asked afterward, they couldn't recall doing it, couldn't repeat a single note. At first, the conductor, Mrs. Lenora Hainsworth, chalked it up to a prank, until it happened again and again, always the same melody, always the same unnatural calm. She recorded the next rehearsal, sent the tape to the diocese. They never responded. But 2 weeks later, 3 men arrived in unmarked black sedans. No clergy collars, no introductions. They confiscated the tape, questioned the children one by one, and forbade Mrs. Hainsworth from speaking of it again. Here's where it twists. One of the parents, an amateur linguist, managed to record the final rehearsal from outside the church. He tried running the audio through phonetic analysis tools. No matches, except one. The structure resembled the same ancient speech patterns recorded from Samuel Harlow in 1883. That parent's house burned down the following week. His wife and children were not home. He was never seen again. And the children? They stopped speaking altogether. Not just the song, not just the choir, all words. One by one, they retreated into total muteness. No medical cause, no brain trauma, just silence. It was like Mardale all over again, but this time more precise. More targeted. Like the language had evolved. One researcher years later proposed that it wasn't music at all. It was a carrier signal. An activation code passed through innocent mouths, a forgotten infection, learning to sing. And if a language can travel through melody, through harmony, then what else could it pass through? In 1996, a small independent radio station known as WQNT-FM operated on the outskirts of Lynchburg, Virginia. It was the kind of station that played late-night jazz, obscure interviews, and public access poetry. Harmless, forgettable. Until 3:12 a.m. on October 19th. A fill-in DJ, half-drunk and looking to kill dead air, pulled an unlabeled reel from the archive room. He assumed it was an ambient instrumental or an old field recording. He loaded the reel-to-reel deck, hit play, and went out back for a cigarette. 7 minutes later, the phone lines lit up. Callers were frantic, some crying, others mumbling incoherently. One man whispered, "Make them stop. They're crawling inside." Another repeated a sequence of numbers before going completely silent. The DJ returned to the booth. The reel was still spinning, but there was no music, just a low rhythmic hum, like someone breathing underwater, and a melody barely audible beneath it. He cut the feed, but it was too late. Police logs from that night report 26 separate 911 calls, all referencing the broadcast. 3 people reported temporary blindness. One woman, a nurse named Hannah Miles, walked out of her home and into oncoming traffic, eyes open, completely unresponsive. The reel, it vanished. But here's the darker part. A local technician, Ronald Keene, had been taping the broadcast at home. He reviewed it frame by frame and found embedded audio fluctuations, frequencies invisible to the human ear but present in the waveform. He isolated them, cleaned them. What he found was the same vocal pattern discovered in the children's choir 25 years earlier. When played back slowly, the melody revealed structured phonemes, the building blocks of language, but not ours, not Latin, not Akkadian, not Navajo, older. It was a language of command, a viral sequence, a mindworm. Keene's notes describe the sound as not here, with the ears, but somewhere deeper, between the blood and the bone. He burned the tapes, quit radio, and disappeared within the year. And WQNT. It shut down 4 days later, without explanation. The official reason? Technical malfunction. But that's what they always say. Because here's the unspoken rule. When something reaches into your subconscious and starts rewriting your perception of sound itself, they don't issue warnings, they shut it down fast. West Virginia, 1986. A rural psychiatric hospital known as Brackenridge Asylum quietly admitted 3 patients over the course of 9 weeks. No family history, no shared geography, no criminal backgrounds, just one common trait. Each claimed they had heard music in their heads, but it wasn't music they recognized. It was singing. Children's voices, a haunting, toneless chant, with no words they could repeat. The doctors assumed schizophrenia. That was the easy answer. Each patient was assigned to a different wing of the asylum, no contact between them, no exposure. But then something began to surface. Nurses reported that all 3 individuals, at different times, in different rooms, began drawing the same symbol. A spiraled eye, inside a broken triangle, inside a blacked-out sun, over and over, dozens of times. The doctors shrugged it off as coincidence, but one nurse, Janet Holler, documented them. She took photos, and when she looked deeper, she realized the symbol wasn't just similar. It was identical to a sketch found in the journal of Ronald Keene, the radio technician who recorded the silent broadcast 10 years earlier. But he'd never been in Brackenridge. He'd never met these patients. And he was long dead. Janet brought this to the hospital board. 2 weeks later, she was fired. Her belongings were seized, her license revoked. But she didn't stop. In a final recorded interview before she disappeared, Janet whispered something chilling. They aren't sick. They're receivers. They heard the same thing, and it's still playing, not through radios but through them. Their bodies are tuning forks. She believed Brackenridge wasn't just housing patients. It was harboring a transmission, a psychic contagion. And here's what the records don't show. All 3 of those patients had been to Virginia, specifically to the area once known as Clifton, the town Richmond, Virginia, 1912. A quiet memo was passed among the state's inner council, a room of men whose names have mostly been forgotten, not because they were unimportant, but because someone wanted it that way. The order was simple: seal the vault, bury the records, speak of this never again. The vault was located beneath the Virginia State Archives, a stone chamber older than the building itself. It had no known architect, no official blueprint, and contained records dating back to the pre-colonial era, including letters, journals, and artifacts from the lost mining town of Clifton, the same town that woke up without voices in 1883. One document inside the vault was said to hold impressions not meant for language. Another, a map showing radio signal ley lines drawn long before radio even existed. No one questioned it. They buried it. Until 1997. A man named Dr. Felix Hammond, a semi-retired historical linguist with ties to DARPA and the Smithsonian, made a formal request to examine the sealed chamber. The request was denied. He insisted, filed suit, threatened to go public. The court gave him 48 hours of supervised access. That's all he needed. On the morning of June 17th, Dr. Hammond entered the vault with a camera, a microphone, and a translator's lexicon for 6 extinct languages. By noon, contact was lost. Security footage showed only static. His camera melted. The guards who found him said he was sitting cross-legged, whispering to the stone. He had carved something into his own arms. It lives in silence. He was placed under psychiatric observation, later transferred to a private military hospital. But that's not the strange part. 3 months after his detainment, a video surfaced on an anonymous website. It showed Dr. Hammond staring into the lens and saying, "What they buried where there was never dead, and what they found was never human." Then a frequency, not words, not tone, just a layered harmonic hum that caused seizures in 12% of the viewers and hallucinations in 5%. The government scrubbed the clip. The site vanished. But fragments still exist, in places you're not supposed to go. Darknet archives, abandoned forums, and the dreams of those who watched it. So now we ask again, what did the town of Clifton unleash in 1883? And why did the voices stop, only for something else to start whispering beneath the floor of history? By the spring of 1915, 32 years after Clifton fell silent, a strange phenomenon began sweeping through rural Virginia. Children speaking languages their families had never heard. It started in 3 towns, then 7, then 13. Each time the same pattern. A child would stop speaking for weeks. No illness, no trauma, no warning. And then one day, they'd begin again. But not in English, not in Latin, not in any known human dialect. Parents were horrified. Priests called it demonic. Doctors blamed neurological dissociation. But linguists, they listened to the recordings and froze. The language was syntactically perfect, grammatically precise, structured like a form of spoken mathematics. Worse, it matched. Each of these isolated children, from farms, villages, and slums, were speaking the same unknown tongue flawlessly without ever meeting. By 1916, a group of 6 children was brought to the University of Virginia under observation. A linguist named Professor Samuel Rooks was assigned to document their speech. What he found made him question not only language, but memory, reality, and time itself. The children didn't just speak, they sang. Not in melody, but in harmonics, words spoken at multiple tones simultaneously. A layered resonance that created physical sensations in those who heard it. Some wept, some vomited, some blacked out. One nurse described hearing the children and feeling as if, quote, "A part of my soul was being called back to a place I've never been, but missed all my life." Then came the drawings. Each child, separately and without prompt, began sketching the same image. A black spire rising from the earth, surrounded by rings of faceless figures, and above it, an eye. Not human, not divine. Something else. They called it the listener. Professor Rooks vanished 6 months later. His final journal entry read, "They are not learning this. They are remembering." What had these children tapped into? Why was the same frequency from Dr. Hammond's vault now humming in their throats? And most of all, why were they never afraid? They were not possessed. They were not disturbed. They were at peace. Almost as if they'd found their way back home. October 3rd, 1916. A date that disappeared from most official weather records, but in the diaries of farmers, in the margins of forgotten newspapers, and on crumbling telegrams buried in county archives. The truth still flickers. That night, Virginia's sky turned black. Not the black of storm clouds, not the black of night. It was a perfect void, swallowing moonlight, stars, and electricity alike. Witnesses described it as if someone had thrown a curtain across the heavens. No wind, no thunder, just a weight in the sky, like gravity reversed. And then, over the old mining town of Clifton, the listener appeared. It began with a hum. Same frequency from Dr. Hammond's buried device. Same resonance the children sang. Except now, it echoed from above, vibrating rooftops, pulsing inside the bones of every living thing. People stepped outside, mouths agape, but still, no one could speak. Then came the light. A column, narrow, blinding, impossibly vertical, rose from the abandoned mineshaft at the center of town, and inside it, a shape. Tall, slender, unmoving, eyeless, faceless, but watching. It wasn't a creature, it was an event, a manifestation, a mirror perhaps, of everything Clifton had hidden, repressed or silenced. The listener did nothing. It simply was. Children dropped to their knees and began to hum. Old miners sobbed. A priest collapsed in seizure. And then, silence again. The light vanished. The sky returned. But the townspeople never did. By morning, Clifton was empty. Not a single soul remained. Doors left open, fires still warm, breakfast half-eaten, but not one human sound, not one breath. The government sealed the area within 48 hours, blamed a gas leak, then called it a hoax, then erased it. But the listener has been seen since. In Brazil, 1938, in Siberia, 1961, in Kenya, 1974, always above a town just before its people lost the ability to speak and the will to stay. What is the listener? Is it a god, a machine, a memory, or is it humanity's own scream, swallowed for so long it finally took form? Because the darkest truth may be this: we didn't lose our voices. We gave them away to the very thing we couldn't bear to understand. After Clifton vanished, the US government didn't just cover it up, they catalogued it, studied it, and by 1917 they had a name for what they found: Project Echo. At first glance, it looked like another military intelligence file buried deep within the War Department's black archives. But what it contained was the blueprint for weaponizing silence. Not metaphorical silence, literal, measurable, deployable voids. Echoes stripped of origin, frequencies that don't bounce back. Sound fields that enter the ear and erase intention instead of conveying meaning. They studied Clifton's hum, analyzed the surviving stone carvings of the listener's frequency field. They even reconstructed Hammond's device in a bunker outside Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And when it worked, when they produced even a sliver of that humming resonance, test subjects experienced memory gaps, language loss, emotional paralysis, and in one case, complete erasure of personal identity. They realized something terrifying. Silence was not the absence of noise, it was the removal of meaning, and that could be directed, deployed, controlled. By the 1940s, Project Echo had evolved. It had labs beneath the Library of Congress, funding from non-existent arms of the Treasury, and test grounds, from isolated Midwest towns to prison facilities in the South. One experiment even targeted radio stations. Certain broadcasts were laced with echo patterns, indistinguishable from static to the average ear, but effective in pacifying entire towns. The people didn't question the news. They didn't resist. They didn't even remember what they were supposed to be angry about. Echo became a cure for disobedience. But it came at a cost. Every test left behind an aftershock. A town where suicide spiked. A school where children stopped speaking. A neighborhood where dogs stopped barking. Forever. Even the scientists began to hear the hum in their sleep and see figures watching them through lab glass. They shut it down officially in 1952. But insiders claim it never ended. They just renamed it, moved it deeper underground, and started testing it through your screens. So next time you scroll and feel a blankness wash over you, that dead stare, that forgetting what you were about to do, ask yourself, what part of you is still silent? And who taught you that silence was peace? You were told this began in Virginia, 1883, but that was only where the veil lifted. The truth, the origin, begins long before America was born, long before Christ, long before writing. It begins in Babylon, with a priesthood not of words, but of sounds you were forbidden to hear. The listener was not a demon, not even a god. It was a concept, a ritual, a system of control disguised as sacred worship. And those who mastered it, they didn't speak. They listened. In the ziggurats of Babylon, the high priests entered chambers carved with sonic geometry. Stone amplified certain frequencies and cancelled others. They would sit in stillness until their minds dissolved into that resonance. Then they would return, with visions, with commands. The people believed they were the voices of the gods, but in truth they were conduits for a knowledge deeper and older, a silencing intelligence, an entity that fed not on belief but on compliance. This cult of silence didn't die with Babylon. It migrated. It resurfaced in ancient Egypt's mystery schools, hidden in the tones of ceremonial chants. It passed through Pythagoras in Greece, who taught that certain intervals could tame the soul, and when Rome fell, it was preserved by the Vatican, sealed in vaults beneath the Library Secretum. The Church didn't fear heresy, it feared resonance, and so the listener's legacy became fractured, encoded in stained glass, buried in Gregorian chants, and disguised as exorcisms. But the crown, the empire, they were not blind. The British learned to replicate the tones in colonial temples. They used sound to control uprisings. They whispered curses into jail cells that made prisoners forget their own names. By the time America was founded, the listener had many masks, and secret societies carried its seed into the New World, not to revere it, but to weaponize it. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Skullbones, they all had versions of the listener's hum. They called it the word that is not spoken. They carved it into stone, into silence, into systems. You were never meant to know any of this, because if you knew the lineage of silence, you'd start to recognize it everywhere. They told you the universe began with a bang. But what if it ends in silence? In 1883, the town of Duval, Virginia, was only the test site, a microcosm, a whisper of a global rehearsal. Because the final phase of the listener's return is not about muting a town, it's about preparing the world for a total auditory blackout. The ancients believed that language bound reality, that names gave form to chaos. To silence the world is to unmake it. Today you live in the loudest civilization in human history. Your devices ping, your cities roar, your feeds never stop talking. And yet, you're not hearing anything real. You are drowning in noise, while the signals that matter, the tones that activate, have been removed. We replaced resonance with distraction. And in doing so, we handed the listener control. Because here's the secret. The human body, your nervous system, is not just a biological machine. It's a resonant instrument. Every organ vibrates at a specific frequency. Every emotion has a sonic footprint. The listener learned how to manipulate that, and now they're resetting the scale. The goal is not to kill, it's to reformat. When the final frequency is triggered, you won't die, you'll go still. Docile, obedient, erased. Not by force, but by tuning. Just like in Duval. When that pulse hit, inaudible, precise, the townsfolk didn't scream. They didn't panic. They just opened their eyes and forgot how to speak. Their identity, their stories, their fears, their rebellion, vanished. Not deleted, muted. And somewhere, a signal recorded it all. Think about that. When your words vanish but your consciousness remains, who owns your mind? This is the coming phase. The final frequency isn't science fiction. It's been measured, tested, and replicated in defense labs from Virginia to Geneva. But it's not a weapon. It's a ceremony. One last mass ritual. And you've already been invited, which means only one section remains. Prepare for the descent. There comes a moment, and this is that moment, when knowledge becomes a doorway, and stepping through costs you everything you once believed, You are no longer a passive listener, no longer just a man watching a dark history unfold. You are the descendant of the silenced, a soul chosen not to obey, but to remember. Because once you've heard the truth behind the silence, you are marked, not by them, but by the universe itself. Let me ask you this: what would you do if tomorrow you woke up and your voice was gone? Not from illness, not from fear, but from design. Would you fight to speak again, or would you embrace the quiet and vanish into it? They are counting on you doing nothing. They are counting on your obedience, on your comfort, on your hunger for noise to distract you from reality. But if you've made it this far, you are not like them. You are the man who stared into the black and didn't blink. You are the one who heard the hum beneath the world and didn't look away. So now I ask you, leave a comment below with the phrase, "Silence is the signature," typed twice. Not for the algorithm, not for me, but for your own mind, to lock in the transformation, to signal that you heard and that you are awake. Because the next phase isn't a story, it's a signal, and those who are tuned will hear it when it comes. This channel is not entertainment. It's initiation. Each video a key, and today you've unlocked the final door. So remember what the town of Duval forgot. Words are power, and when they're taken, what's left must be stronger. Welcome to the silence. Now listen for what comes next.